David's lowest point becomes a turning point in his life. As God is working, and you can see God's hand working here, even though it looks like, where is God? He's working. And it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. If you'd have been around in Jesus' day and Jesus picked his 12 followers, you'd have said, "Oh, Lord, help us. Let me help you. I'll pick 12 good leaders. Where'd you get those? A fisherman? Oh, cussing fisherman, Peter? Good night. And James and John, where'd you get those? Matthew, a crooked tax collector? You would have never selected the 12 that Jesus selected. And I want to tell you something. These 400 that came to David, you would have never thought they would be the nucleus for the mightiest army on the face of the earth one day. I mean, these guys were the rejects. These guys, they just weren't the ones. But I think it's so significant that that's how God works. That's an encouragement to me, is it to you? Listen to 1 Corinthians 1. For consider your calling, brethren, that there are not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, and the base things of the world, and the despised God has chosen, the things that are not, so that he might nullify the things that are, so that no man can boast before God. But by his doing you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God and righteousness, sanctification, so forth. And so we cannot boast before God. I mean, it was the same way with David. When Samuel went to the house of Jesse to anoint one of his sons, he had 8 boys, and he didn't even bother to call in the 8th son. He had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel and thought, surely this is it. And no, it was the 8th. The one that man overlooked. And that's God's hand, isn't it? That's how God works. And you might be thinking and sitting there thinking, I'm not qualified. I could really never be used of God. I want to tell you something. You would be surprised how God is searching, questing, looking for someone that he can use. And you don't have to, God's not limited. He doesn't have to, he can use little o you and little o me because he's an amazing God. And so David, with his 400 men, I just can't get over this. This is amazing. David sort of becomes a Robin Hood. His Sherwood Forest is the Judean hills, the Judean wilderness. Not only did he teach these men how to hunt and how to be courageous warriors and how to use the spear and the bow and arrow and so forth, and not only did he spend hours working with them on that, but listen to this. They saw something in David they knew they all needed. As David prayed, the cave became a tabernacle. That old dark, damp cave, it became a church. It became a holy place, the presence of God. These men saw something there that was awesome. They felt the Spirit of God. They had never felt that before. Oh, I love that, don't you? We pray every week, God, meet with us. And I just love it when people say to me, oh, I felt the Spirit of God in church today, when we gathered for worship. And I just felt God speaking to my heart. And that's the way it was with these men. They heard David pray. They saw David. They saw some fear in David. He was human, and they saw that. But they also saw courage come into his heart. Let me read to you a little bit of what David wrote in Psalm 56 during this time. When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. In God, in whose word I praise, in God I have put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can mere man do to me? They attack, they lurk, they watch my steps, as they have waited to take my life. Then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. Look at this line. This I know, that God is for me. Wow. In God, whose word I praise. In the Lord, whose word I praise. In God I have put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? Wow, these men saw David, and yes, they saw him in his moments of weakness, but they also saw him call on his God, and they saw that panic go away as he went to God in prayer. And they saw his confidence rise as he reminded himself and reminded them that this I know, God is for me. Wow. And that put courage in their hearts. And they began to see that this man walks with God. This man knows what it is to pray. And it began to touch their hearts and their lives. These old rough bunch of guys. David wrote Psalm 57. If I had time, I'd turn over there and read to you, because it reads a lot like Psalm 56. David putting his trust in God. David seeking God. And wow. And Psalm 34. Oh, what a psalm. And David said in Psalm 34, verse 11, come, you children, listen to me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord. I will teach you to respect God. I will teach you to reverence God. I will teach you the right kind of fear of God. Not run and hide fear, but awesome fear. What a God. Oh. These men needed to learn the fear of God. And David said, come, you children, I will teach you the fear. And he called them children. Why? They weren't children. They were men. But you know what? When it came to God, when it comes to God, you and I are children. We're just children. We're just like the little kids meeting down below us right now. And we just humbly come. That's what Jesus said, except you come as a child, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. And so you and I, we're just kids, you know. And when it comes to children, in fact, I love it in the book of Exodus. You know, it talks about the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, the children of Israel passing through the Red Sea, the children of Israel, whatever. One little boy in his Sunday school class, you know, he heard all that. And on the way home in the car, he said to his mother, Mother, didn't the adults do anything? He thought it was all the children, you know. But God calls you children, me children. We're all children. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Do you know what? David in the cave is not only teaching these men how to be warriors. He's not only teaching them all the secrets of war and all that. He's teaching them how to walk with God. He's giving them what he has. The reverence for God, the respect for God, the relationship with God that he developed as a shepherd boy. And you know what? It's the best thing for David. It's not just for these 400 men. It's exactly what David needed during this hour. God is working. Oh, I want you to see something else. Look at verse 3 of our passage, 1 Samuel 22. Verse 3, and David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me. Then he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. And so David's taking care of his mother and daddy. Why? Because it's dangerous. I mean, King Saul is, you know, he's crazy. And so, man, he might go and kill my parents. I better get him out of the country. And so David goes and takes his mother and father, and he takes them out of Israel to Moab. Now, who were the Moabites? Do you remember where they came about? Let me refresh your memory. When Lot had to flee Sodom, you remember that? back in Genesis, when Lot had to flee Sodom, remember his wife was destroyed? And remember, Lot ended up with his 2 daughters. And a horrible, disgraceful thing, they got him drunk, committed incest, and through that horrible relationship came a baby and some children then came, and the Moabites are descendants of that incestuous relationship. And so you'd think, well, God's not going to use the Moabites. Oh, no, we have a great God of mercy. Do you remember the little story of Ruth? Oh, my. There are 2 books in the Old Testament named after a woman, Esther and Ruth, and they are both beautiful stories, incredible stories. Ruth starts out with a funeral in that book, and then it ends with a wedding. But Ruth is a Moabite. And she, on a dusty road one day, made a great commitment to her mother-in-law, Naomi. She said, I will not leave you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. And your God will be my God. And she went back to Israel with Naomi. And she got into the welfare program of Israel. They had a welfare program. They did. It's called gleaning. And when the harvesters pick the crops, when they harvest, anything they missed was for the people coming along behind. That people could come along behind and pick up what the harvesters missed. And God said, listen, if you miss a few things, let it go. Don't go back and get it. That's what God said. Leave it for the poor. And so Ruth, this Moabite girl, they were poor, obviously, and she was gleaning in the field. And the master of the field, what was his name? Boaz, thank you. I forgot my story. Boaz saw her. And to make a long story short, we had a wedding. He married a Moabite girl. You know the story. Why am I telling it to you? Good job. And if you were to look in Matthew at the lineage of Jesus, they're all Israelites all the way back to Abraham, except one Moabite girl by the name of Ruth. And Ruth is the great-great-grandmother of David. And so in this very dangerous time, David goes to some folk that are actually related to him, the Moabites. He goes to his great-great-grandmother's people and he says, would you take care of my parents? Now look at that verse in verse 4 again in our passage. And it says in verse 4, he left them with the king of Moabite, and they stayed with him all that time that David was in the stronghold. You see that little phrase, the stronghold? The stronghold. It's in the next verse too. And it speaks of David being in the stronghold. David has now moved from the cave of Adullam. He's moved to what's called the stronghold. He has 400 men. And maybe the cave, maybe they just sort of outgrew the cave or something. I don't know how big it was, but they're at the stronghold now. The stronghold. Not a stronghold, the stronghold. Do you know what the word is in the Hebrew? It is Masada. Masada. There it is on the screen.